Hero, when you are on a journey, you are likely to come across the unexpected. You'll see new lands, new places, new faces, new customs, unexpected aesthetics, unexpected language.
In my experience, part of the mikvah lady, and I say this because I've never met like a mikvah bro.
Right.
Even when men are, but if you're not hip to Pirkei Avot, I'd phrase it this way. Just say, hey, buddy, I need a wing Jew.
Right. Yeah. I think, John, that's the most difficult question you've asked.
Booyah.
Today, on this new leg of our journey together, we're going to be learning with a leader, a rabbi who teaches other rabbis to cross borders, to break barriers, to question assumptions about themselves and about others. And by doing this work of questioning assumptions and breaking barriers and crossing borders, these rabbis free themselves to teach in new languages, with new aesthetics, with new customs, all in service of sharing our ancient Torah in a way that maintains the integrity of the message and the authenticity of the messenger. But like so many epic journeys, we're going to start from someplace safe. We're going to start from home. We are going to start from the base.
Welcome to the Jewcurious Show, where learning about Judaism and getting to know Jewish people can help you live a life of meaning, joy, human connection, and personal growth. And now your host, Rabbi John Carrier.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Hadar Ensemble, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Hero, for tuning in. Are we tuning in? Are we downloading? Are we live streaming? You do you. But today we have a wonderful show with a friend of mine, a teacher of mine, a mentor of mine, with whom I learn something new and profound every time I have a conversation with her. And today's conversation was no different. Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu. She is the director of Rabbis Without Borders at Klal, a rabbinic training fellowship that you've heard me speak about before, and you've heard me interview other people in that fellowship. And not for nothing, I'm really trying to share with you the teachings of rabbis who push the boundaries, who cross the borders, who are creating something new in the Jewish world while teaching something ancient and enduring, and who is responsible for much of this border crossing, much of this boundary pushing, none other than Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu. But before we settle in, before you put the phone in your pocket or on your dashboard or beside the sink where you're washing the dishes, or in the hand that's not holding the leash or we'll say the dog cleanup bag, you always want to make sure you know what hand that is in and what hand your phone is in. Trust me on this one. Before we square any of that stuff away, I want you to take a moment, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this show in the podcast listening platform of your choice. That way you'll make sure that every episode comes to you auto-magically without your having to lift a finger, except maybe the finger that you push the subscribe button and then the play button with. That finger's cool. Rest of the fingers, put them down. But if you're like, John, I'm already subscribed. I don't need all this mumbo jumbo. I've heard other episodes before. I'm tuning back in for a reason. Then that tells me that you are someone who is perfectly qualified to rate and review this show in iTunes or whatever platform you're listening to it on. It probably has a way of giving it stars, giving it smiley faces, pink puffy heart stickers. In iTunes, it's stars. And if you're feeling especially literary, please feel free to leave a review in that same zone to let me, to let my guests, and to let other people know what you think of the show. How we doing? Love to hear from you. So to review, hit the subscribe button, give it some stars, however many stars you think it deserves. Be completely honest. I won't take it personally. And once you've gotten all that stuff squared away, I invite you to put the phone in your pocket, put it up on the dashboard, put it out of reach, and settle in for a profound, a surprising, and a really beautiful human conversation between me and Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu. Let's check it out.
Coming to the microphone, we have Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu, director of Rabbis Without Borders at Klal and founder of RabbiCareers.com. Not to be confused with RabbiCarrier.com. That's my website. Hers is RabbiCareers.com. But enough about my website. Rabbi Sirbu, I am delighted to have you here on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So what I know about you is that you are a rabbi. I also know that you are a fellow Texan. Now, were you born in Texas?
No, I was not born in the great state of Texas. I was born in New York. I moved there when I was 3. So it's close.
Okay, well, nobody's perfect, but I've spent enough time with you to know that you are a daughter of the Republic in all respects. So
yes, I am.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you here to share you with my audience, whether they're from Texas or not. Like I said, nobody's perfect, but I've gotten to know you mostly through Klal and this organization, Rabbis Without Borders. Now, many people, when they hear that I'm a part of this group, Rabbis Without Borders, they say, well, how's Africa this time of year?
Right.
And confuse it with maybe Doctors Without Borders. Can you dispel some of that confusion for me?
Yes.
What is this about?
Yes, I can. Thank you for asking. No, Rabbis Without Borders, we're not sending rabbis out to Africa or South America to do what Doctors Without Borders does. What we do is we try to push rabbis beyond their own borders. So, for instance, when rabbis go to seminary, each seminary kind of trains rabbis in a particular way and teaches them how to do things according to either Jewish law or just certain parameters that particular movement believes in. And what we love to do is get together a very diverse group of rabbis and push them and challenge their thinking so that they can go beyond whatever the borders that were erected for them, either earlier in their training or earlier in their life in some way, so that they can be as creative as possible in how they teach and share Jewish wisdom and traditions.
Okay, so after a long time in seminary, how do you break those borders down? I mean, what does this training entail?
Yeah, so this training entails many things. We do it on several different kinds of levels. The first is bringing together a very diverse group of rabbis. As you may or may not know, there are a number of different denominations within Judaism, and often rabbis who belong to a particular denomination don't have the opportunity to meet rabbis in other denominations throughout their kind of daily lives or the ways they go. They're really very siloed. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing we do to help break down borders is try to get rid of some of those silos, so that in a room we will have 20 rabbis, and we do it, specifically kind of in a small group. And within those 20 rabbis, we'll have Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Renewal, and rabbis who don't identify with any movement at all, and put them in a room together. And one of the first things we do is get them to relate to each other as individuals, which is actually sometimes more challenging than you might think. It's like Longhorns and Aggies if you're from Texas. Right?
Yes, now I understand. Okay, you made it clear for me.
I thought you'd like it.
Yeah, no, well, what are some of the challenges that emerge?
Yes, some of the challenges that emerge is that people make snap assumptions about the other. That happens, as we know, in the United States in the political realm as well, right? So an Orthodox rabbi perhaps would meet a Reform rabbi and would make a snap judgment that may or may not be true, that this Reform rabbi is, say, politically liberal or very liberal in their observance of Judaism, and the opposite would be true, and that the Reform rabbi would think the Orthodox rabbi was politically conservative and very and follows a lot of strictures in his observance of Judaism. And I say his when referring to an Orthodox rabbi, since there are very few women who are ordained as rabbis within the Orthodox movement. But what we have is that these assumptions may not necessarily be true. In Rabbis Without Borders, we have Republican and conservative-leaning Reform rabbis and very politically liberal Orthodox rabbis. And we've learned you can't make a snap assumption about what somebody's Jewish observance level is necessarily based on their denominational affiliation or lack thereof. And so that comes out very, very soon in our conversations as we has different assumptions about how people pray. People who belong to different denominations have different traditions around certain prayer services, and those often get broken down very quickly as well once the group is together in some kind of prayer experience.
Okay. Now, you didn't mention conservative rabbis in there. I won't take that personally, but I'll take an argument from silence that we can assume that all conservative rabbis are politically and in accordance to their observance bland and have no opinions whatsoever.
Well, see, I didn't mention conservative rabbis because they sit smack dab in the middle of all of this. And the conservative movement likes to consider itself a big tent, including everybody. And as we know, that's not necessarily the case with conservative Judaism. But yeah, it's sometimes harder for others to make certain assumptions, although they get made about conservative rabbis as well. Sometimes that they are, in fact, conservative when the name itself is somewhat of a misnomer.
Right. You know, people make assumptions about me that I am broad-minded, and I quickly correct them of that. So, well, I tell you what, I've had an incredible experience. I've let people on this show know before that I was in a recent cohort of Rabbis Without Borders, met some great people, including some people that have been or will be appearing on this show. And it was a really profound experience for me. So I want to thank you for your leadership in that and Claw for its support for that. So here's a question that I have, though. I'm in a congregation in Burbank, California. I don't spend a lot of my time with other rabbis. And it's nothing personal. It's just that's my work. I'm with Stam Yidden, and I'm in a community. I'm in like the Rotary, so I'm in like the not Jewish world here as well. Whereas you sounds like spend a lot of time hanging out with rabbis.
Yes, I do.
And even beyond your professional sphere, I understand that your spouse is also a rabbi.
Yes, he is.
So how does that work? Like, did you guys meet at a rabbi conference or something?
No, actually, it's a great story. It's just like the beginning of a joke. You know, two rabbis meet in a bar. We met in a bar.
What was the name of the bar?
McSorley's Irish Pub in East Village of New York City.
Oh, that's a famous one. I just assumed that it was going to be like a rabbi bar, like Akiva's or something like that.
No, we were exactly Akiva's. That's funny. No, it was actually pretty random. I was going out with a friend from college who happened to be meeting up with a friend of his from high school who was in rabbinical school and a different school than the one I was in. And she brought along a friend of hers from rabbinical school, and we all, met and were hanging out together. So it was really kind of funny because we were the only rabbinical school students in the whole bar, and he made me laugh right away because he went to the more liberal rabbinical school, the Reform movement, and I went to the more, conservative one of the conservative movement. And McSorley's Irish Pub has lots of pictures of dead white men on the walls. Okay. And so when we were introduced, and he said, "Oh, you go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, you must feel very comfortable here with all the pictures of dead white men on the walls."
Oh my goodness gracious.
And I knew I liked this guy because he noted that, and he, was able to make fun of it all at the same time. It was really great.
Well, I think I'd like him too. That's awesome. And I always say that, it's funny. I've met a lot of Reform rabbinical students in bars as well, mostly because when we were studying in Israel, my classmates would go to this particular, I'll say sports bar, close as Jerusalem has to a sports bar. And then the students from the Reform rabbinical school would also go to the same sports bar. Right. And we go there because they had great appetizers, but also because they would live stream over the internet football. Right. So they would have like the Sunday game, like late on Monday night or whatever it was. So we would go there to watch the football games. The difference was that the students from Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary, they would all bring books. Right. We were done for when we were in yeshiva all day, and we would study there, and then we were done at 5 or 6, and then we would just go out and celebrate. No homework because we'd just be back reading again. But all these kids had term papers due the next day. Yeah. Right. So anytime I'm in a group of people like in a conservative congregation with conservative rabbis, anybody ever gives flack to my Reform brothers and sisters, I would say like they are just as serious about this as we are, and they work twice as hard. So so don't be insulting Reform rabbis in front of me. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. There are a lot of people who may be listening to this podcast who aren't Jewish. And so I want to take this opportunity to ask you, what's one thing that you would want not Jewish people to know about Jewish people and Judaism?
Okay. I would say, first of all, in thinking about Judaism, I would say the one thing that's really important for people to know is that Judaism is all about questioning.
Okay.
Right? In the Jewish tradition.
Are you sure?
I am sure. You're doubting me, John?
No, I'm just asking a question.
I think that Jewish tradition is all about questioning everything, every aspect of life, every aspect of God, every aspect of observance. Most of our Jewish texts, the Talmud, is all about questions and answers and arguments. I think some of the most interesting discussions that come out of Jewish life today are all about questions and sometimes arguments and answers, and what does this mean and what does that mean, and we are, I would say, a group of people who are always learning, right? Okay. And that's how the questioning plays into that. And so, for someone who's curious about Judaism, I would say that's fabulous. You're already on the path. You're already asking questions. You're already beginning to find answers and learning, and know that you can change. If you're looking for your own answer, you can change your answer based on new learning. I think that's a lot of Judaism. It's a lot of what attracted me to wanting to study the tradition and really have it be an essential part of my life, is because I love the ability to constantly question and learn more and reassess.
Mm-hmm. No, I would certainly corroborate that, especially in the experience of the people that I talk to, say on a Beit Din for conversion, and ask people what sort of drew you to this. And that answer about questions comes up a lot. Mm-hmm. It's something that people find very attractive, and it's something within Judaism that people find very attractive. However, it can also be kind of frustrating and also a little bit dissonant in the sense that when people think of religion, they often think of this provider of answers to life's big questions, right? When people have questions about life, they go to maybe a religion or a religious institution or a religious person and say, I can't figure this out. This isn't something there's a manual for. It's like, what's my purpose here? Right. What does God want from me? What now? Why is this terrible stuff happening to me? Things like that. And people really want answers. Yes. And I think what can be frustrating in Judaism is that, there's a variety of opinions on just about any topic you can ask. And this is true for people outside and also for people on the inside. They're like, okay, what's the answer, Rabbi? Right. Yeah. What does Judaism say about X? And my teacher, Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, said you almost never want to begin an answer with the phrase Judaism says. Right? Yes. So how do you help somebody out of that quandary where they're coming to you looking for an answer or maybe the answer? Yeah. And it's hard for you to legitimately authentically say, well, this is the answer to your question. How do you get around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually I follow up with more questions of my own, right? I want to know why is the person interested in that? What are they trying to solve or answer for themselves? Because then I get a sense of sometimes what they're looking for. So I can then either say, well, one tradition within Judaism says, and tell them, what one tradition says, or I will sometimes give various different viewpoints points, again, depending on what that person says they're looking for.
This reminds me of the story they told us in our last year when they're sort of preparing us after years of, parsing Hebrew verbs and studying text. When we get to the end, they say, oh, by the way, you're going to have a job doing this in real life soon. So this is what you should know. It's an old rabbi story. If somebody comes to you and says, Rabbi, is this chicken kosher? Your response should be first, instead of giving an answer, you say, well, can you afford another chicken?
Right.
Because that really gets to that gets to the reality of the person's situation. And that answer that you give them, if they say, no, I can't afford another chicken. And let's say you look at the chicken and it's got sort of indicators that it might not be, according to Hoyle, as it were. But that person's necessity may require that you say, well, yes, this chicken is suitable for you to eat. And that can be an authentic and legitimate Jewish response
absolutely
to that person.
Absolutely.
Right. And this is also why, I always point people to the Pirkei Avot that says, you should get yourself a rabbi, right? If you're studying, you need to find a rabbi, you need to find a friend, and you need to give people the benefit of the doubt. But that rabbi piece is that you can read a lot about Judaism, whether it's in our texts or on Wikipedia or what have you. But you will have the most success or, have the most traction if you have a teacher who knows you and knows your personal situation, knows your needs and your barriers and your borders and things like that. Because there's a multiplicity of answers for any given circumstance, and the right answer for you might best be teased out by a teacher who knows you. Right.
I think that's absolutely correct. One of the most important things when you start to become curious about Judaism is to find a teacher, and frankly, I would say saying the right teacher is not necessarily the right language, but finding a teacher that you feel comfortable with, that you click with, right? That just because someone gives you a referral to a particular rabbi or teacher does not necessarily mean that's the right person for you. So, often in talking with people, for instance, if you're looking for a therapist, I'll say to somebody, don't just meet with one therapist, go and interview, 3 different people and see which one kind of feels right to you. I would give the same advice for someone looking for a teacher or a rabbi to do more intensive Jewish study with. You want to find one that feels right you, and meet with a couple of different rabbis, both on a personality level and also in terms of the different denominations and affiliations within Judaism. You can have a sense that you're more drawn to someone on the liberal end or someone on the conservative end, and that's where I would say you should start. And as your learning increases, if that changes, then you can change, your teacher along with it, or learn from different teachers if you're the kind of person who likes really to get different points of view. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Working with somebody one-on-one or in a small group is absolutely the way to go.
Mm-hmm. So I was recently reminded of, I think this was a Pew Research Center study. Sounds like something they would do because it's got numbers in it, saying that something like 97% of Jews surveyed feel proud of being Jewish. I think I actually learned this from you originally at Call. And 97% means like statistically everybody, right? Yeah. So, any Jew you meet is most likely proud to be Jewish. And yet there's it's less than a majority. It's something like 30% of Jews belong to a synagogue or associate with the Jewish community in some organized way. And I'm not going to try to dig into the why of that because there's a number of different reasons, and people have different reasons for that. But let's say somebody who is proud of being Jewish, but doesn't necessarily feel comfortable in Jewish places or in Jewish institutions, and yet they have these kinds of questions. Right. They have these things that could benefit from being in Jewish community, these questions that could benefit from talking to a rabbi. Mm-hmm. But for one reason or another, they don't feel comfortable approaching a rabbi or joining a synagogue or engaging in something. Either they didn't have it growing up and so they don't feel qualified, or they left after their bar mitzvah, which is which is a typical thing, people, because that's, I think if you were in the experience of being a 13-year-old and you had to give a speech and sing in a foreign language in front of, a couple hundred people, you might not want to come back the next day.
Right.
But for these people who have a need that could benefit from being a part of a Jewish community, but maybe don't know the right next step in, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, that is, it's a difficult position to be in, but I think they're multi-steps. So number one is, to do a little bit of research. One would be, to get to know you, John, and watch your videos and see what you've got out there on YouTube and Jewcurious and all these places.
Paid for by John Carrier.
That's one. Two is there are a number of kind of Ask a Rabbi websites out there. Mm-hmm. If it's like a specific question that someone's looking to get an answer to, that is one fairly safe method. Safe meaning it feels safe for the person. You're not, risking a whole lot by typing a question into a website and sending it off and waiting for an answer. That's one way to approach that. Then if it comes to the point where someone actually feels like maybe they want to go to some kind of gathering, whether it's religious in nature or not, finding a friend to go with is often a wonderful way to get over that initial feeling of shyness or, oh my gosh, I don't belong here or I shouldn't be here. And just getting somebody, whether they're even Jewish or not, to go with you someplace, I think can be really helpful. If you have any kind of friend to say, hey, I really want to check this place out, do you mind coming with me? I know I've done that in my life when I've walked into spaces where I'm really not sure what I'm walking into. I hate doing that alone. I and I'm an outgoing person. I just hate walking into places alone.
Sure.
So I will often grab somebody, even if I know it's not their thing and they're not so interested, and say, just come with me this one time, right? And then hopefully when I'm there, I will make enough of a connection with somebody else, or at least feel comfortable enough in the space to know that I can walk back in myself another time.
That's
that
awesome.
is what works for me personally.
That is really, I think that's really great advice. The rabbi nerd in me is going back to Pirkei Avot, of course. Again, that same passage where it says, find yourself a teacher and get yourself a friend, because that makes every path easier. Yes. But if you're not hip to Pirkei Avot, I'd phrase it this way. Just say, hey, buddy, I need a wing Jew.
Right. That's it.
I need a wing person in this Jewish space, whether you're Jewish or not. And just because it makes everything easier. And like, look, if you go and it's not your cup of tea and it's super awkward, you could say, look, I'd really love to stay, but my friend has to donate blood and we've got to go.
Right. Exactly. You can like for a date, you can have a prearranged signal for your friend to get you out of there.
Right. And the rabbi's asking, why is she tugging on her ear like that? I don't know. Maybe.
Right.
That's awesome. So in the last week, I've just wrapped up an introduction to Judaism class that I'm teaching. And I have a couple of students from that class who are converting to Judaism. Right. And I work with a few people like this throughout the year. And I also sit on the Beit Din, the rabbis who sort of question people and kind of validate their sincerity and welcome them into the Jewish people. What advice would you give to someone who is going to the mikveh to convert to Judaism tomorrow? Like, what's something you want to make sure they know before they join our people? And then maybe what's the first thing you would say to them after? Like, what's the first step after somebody becomes Jewish?
Oh, what a great question. Okay, well, no, I'm going to answer this as a woman, since I'm a woman, and I've walked a few women through going to the Beit Din process. People are usually nervous, particularly about going to the mikveh, because obviously you have to disrobe in order to get into the mikveh.
What?
Yeah. And in my experience, that could be kind of anxiety-provoking for a lot of people. So I know that one thing for sure that I like to reassure, in my case, women about is that there will be no men looking at them disrobing, and that either myself or in some cases they have what's called a mikveh lady will be actually the only people in the immersion room with them. And in fact, we can avert our eyes until they are in the water, so that for those who are particularly shy and nervous about this part of the process, which is of course understandable, most of us don't like to be naked in front of others, I first try to reassure people that, you know, we're going to make this process of it to be as comfortable for you as possible. That's really the first thing I like to say for someone who's preparing for it.
Right. And part of the mikveh, in my experience, part of the mikveh lady, and I say this because I've never met like a mikveh bro,
right.
even when men are going to the mikveh. But you know, maybe the first mikveh bro is listening to this, and I'd love to hear from you. But part of the mikveh lady's responsibility is to just be present, A, to prepare you for the experience, B, to be sort of a witness that you are fully immersed. That, let's say, if you have Texas-sized hair, and I could say this about my people, that all of your hair is immersed in the water, and that person just says kasher, it was fine, that was a good dunk. And when I've been on a Beit Din and there's a woman who's immersing, me and all of my male colleagues and any men even men in the family, any men present are sort of behind a curtain, and we can hear the mikveh lady say, kasher, that was a good dunk. But anybody, so there are no men present when women are immersing, and there are no women present when men are immersing, just out of everybody's sense of comfort and modesty.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's very, very important to reassure people, because it is kind of weird, like it's not something that most people encounter in their other parts of their life. Right.
There are lots of nice things about the Baptists, but I'm pretty sure they don't do this part.
Right. Yes. So that would be something as someone's preparing. And then in terms of the Beit Din itself, I try to, let people take people's nervousness away and say, we're going to be asking you questions about, your own journey towards Judaism, which obviously because you've lived it, right? And nobody is there, at least in the Beit Dins I've sat on, nobody's there to trip you up, right? Nobody's there to catch you on something. No one's going to be asking you some minutia about Jewish law in order to see if you, really did your homework. What we're primarily interested in is your own journey, your own thought process, your own belief system, why this is important to you, why you want to join the Jewish people. And those are all questions you can answer. I trust that anybody who's going through this process has really spent a lot of time thinking about this. People don't do conversions lightly. And so I reassure everybody coming to the Beit Din, those are the kinds of questions that are going to be asked. And it's not like an oral exam where they're going to be quizzed on tiny details. That's not what this is about.
Right. What is the number of bulls sacrificed on the fourth day of Shavuot?
Right. I couldn't answer that question, and I've never asked it.
Right. And it's a trick question because there are only 2 days of Shavuot, depending on who you ask. So if somebody tries to answer that, then I know right away.
Yeah, there was this old joke. I don't know, since you did not go to the Jewish Theological Seminary, if you knew this, but when I was applying to rabbinical school back in the olden days of the 90s, the interview was at a glass table. And when you entered, they supposedly offered you a glass of water. And there were all these stories that used to circulate about whether you should or should not cross your legs under that glass table, because that somehow signaled something to the admissions committee, and whether you should or should not take the glass of water, because then they would be looking to see if you made a blessing over the water before you drank it. And so it was like they were looking to trip you up. First of all, those were all myths, and none of that was true in reality. And second of all, none of that applies to the conversion process.
Right. So I'll tell you, when I interviewed at JTS, I still, much like with podcasting, pre-hydrated.
Yes.
Just in case.
Just in case. I don't know, do I say a blessing over the water or not? which you usually don't. So
I did the whole thing dry just in case. So say we get somebody through the Beit Din, who are usually very friendly people, and we get them through the mikveh in a very modest way. Bada bing, they're Jewish. Now what? So what's the advice that you would give to somebody on day one, or day two, as the case may be? Because day one is just a party, but.
Right. Yeah. So the first thing I would do is say Mazel Tov, because this is, it's a big transformation. It's really, it's a big deal, and it's a big spiritual change for many people. For those who find it spiritual, so not everybody finds it spiritual, but for those who do, it can be tremendously impactful. Look, I would say hopefully by the time you go through conversion, you will have found some community that you feel some affinity towards. I know that's not always the case, but hopefully it is, in which case I would encourage that person to continue to make connections in that community. If someone hasn't found a community, it's hard to be Jewish alone. Right? This is a religion that is based on community, right? We have lots of communal meals together. Even prayer, you're supposed to have 10 people. Even if you're not into prayer, though, like meals and other celebrations are supposed to be with people. And I think it can be particularly lonely for people who've converted when you don't have a family who is observing those same holidays and traditions with you. I think it's particularly important for someone who has converted to find, when I say a Jewish community, by community, I mean a group of friends, like 3 friends that are going to be your buddies in Judaism, right? Who, on Rosh Hashanah, you can have them over for Rosh Hashanah dinner, right? Or you can go to one of their houses. Or, Hanukkah's coming along, that somebody's going to organize or get together to make latkes and light the candles one of the nights of Hanukkah, right? And also it depends what your points of connection are. If you really like services, then by all means, you should go to services on a regular basis. So it's a lot about, which hopefully as you've gone through the conversion process, you will have figured out what about this tradition most appeals to you, and then kind of double down on that, make those connections. If it's services, if it's learning, if it's community celebrations, do those things and do them with other people.
I love that. And I'll say, just because I've had to have this conversation with some people, when you're not Jewish and then you are, one thing you need to know is that we have, how do I put this? A much higher tolerance for people inviting themselves to stuff. Absolutely. Like, don't be shy. If you don't have a place for Pesach, if you don't have a place to go to the Passover Seder, you can ask, do you have an extra seat at your table? And people can say no. But people won't, by and large, in my experience, people won't be upset by your asking, and they won't think poorly of you.
Right. And in many cases, even if they don't have a seat at their table, they'll say, I might have a friend. Let me make a call.
Right. And this is I'll say different from B'derech Klal. This is different from, I guess, accepted North American etiquette, that you don't invite yourself to stuff. If you're lonely, that's your problem.
Right.
And in the Jewish world, that kind of loneliness isn't a mark of shame. It's a mark of, well, I haven't done my job to reach out to you yet. And you can help me out, because it's actually a mitzvah. It's a good thing, and a commandment even, for me to celebrate Shabbat by inviting people over. It's a commandment to, make sure everybody has enough to eat on Purim and on Passover. Right. And so if you invite yourself over to my house, you're doing me a favor, and increases both of our joy.
Yes.
So I want to take a little bit of a turn here, because I think, in talking to people who have watched some of my videos, and like by virtue of people meeting me through watching my videos, I'm meeting people who are all over the world, and sometimes in very isolated places, at least, in Jewish terms, right? They might be the only Jewish person in their town, or they might think they're the only Jewish person in their town, or feel like that, or the close, they know other Jewish people, but the closest synagogue is 2 hours away, and the closest kosher meat is, 4 hours away.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's great advice that you can't do Jewish alone, and it's good to find a community. But I've also talked to people who hear that and that kind of takes the wind out of their sails because, okay, I don't have that option. Can I not be Jewish? Do I have to get up and move? What kind of advice would you give to people like that?
Yeah, I think, John, that's the most difficult question you've asked.
Booyah.
I know. Look, it's hard. It is hard. If you are alone that doesn't mean you can't do it, however. Let me just say that. Again, it depends on your personal makeup. If you are somebody who being able to sit and read and study and pray by yourself is meaningful, then you can absolutely do it and have a very fulfilling Jewish life. If you are someone who can gather those around you who are not Jewish and share with them and say to them, this is Shabbat, this is how I'm celebrating. Please listen as I do the blessing over the wine or the blessing over the challah. Or, hey, guys, I want to share this tradition I'm doing as a Passover Seder with you. I know you're not Jewish. That's okay. Come, I'm going to share my learning with you, right? If you're someone who is able to do that, by all means, that's great. I grew up in Texas. I was the only Jewish kid in my class growing up. I went to an Episcopal high school. I spent a huge amount of time answering questions about my religion and being the only one who was Jewish in the area, though obviously I had my family. And it is a little lonely. And you do feel, at least I felt, actually I shouldn't make this assumption for anybody else, I felt a little odd and different at times. But I was still very proud of who I was and my traditions and what I did. So I think it is possible. It is hard, and there's nothing I can say, I think, that will deny that. And this is exactly why, in some ways, the internet's great, because you can reach out and join different Facebook groups of Jews that have similar interests to yourself. You can find different ways of connecting online that may, in fact, bring you great satisfaction and connect you to world Jewry in lots of other ways.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions that I've gotten from my audience, and that is, here's my second favorite, and then I'll ask my favorite. My second favorite is, why be Jewish? Right. Or if you are Jewish, why do Jewish?
Well, I can only answer that question for myself. Right. I am Jewish because it brings a great deal of meaning to my life. I observe Jewish traditions like keeping kosher, like I would say, I guess, some of the Shabbat traditions, because it brings God into my life. And I need the comfort of believing that there is a God, that there is somebody looking out for myself and my loved ones. And I intellectually love, as I said before, the questions and the answers and the learning that is inherent in Judaism. It keeps me alive intellectually as well as spiritually. And the built-in community for me is important as well. As I said, I'm outgoing, but I'm also shy. It's hard for me to sometimes meet people. And so having a built-in structure where I'm able to meet people is very helpful. So personally for me, those are the reasons why I am Jewish and actively Jewish in my life.
Now, you may have tipped my hand here, or rather, let me say this: you've actually, almost spoiled my second question for you.
Sorry about that.
Which is, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'll get you back. Who is God for you?
Yeah. So look, God for me is a friend. God is a comforting presence. I very much turn to God as a support in my life. Because life is hard. There's lots of yucky things that happen in life. And I, for one, know that I need help. And so I very much turn to God to help me with the challenges that I face. And I think God loves me unconditionally. I've always believed that. And I think I got that belief straight from my Jewish learning and upbringing.
If it's ever happened that you have felt a presence of God,
yes.
What does that feel like for you?
For me, so thank God I have had that, and it's felt differently at different times. I would say there are some times, either during a prayer experience or I also meditate, where I felt I don't know, a vibration, I guess is the best way of saying it. Something that I kind of feel tickly in the top of my head that runs through my body. I would say there have been other times when I've been upset that I've had the sense of receiving a hug. And then one of the times that will always stick out in my mind is one time when I saw a rainbow. My husband and I were struggling with infertility, and we were driving to an adoption agency to investigate taking that route towards becoming parents. And on the way there was an absolutely gorgeous rainbow that appeared out of nowhere in the sky. And in that moment, I just knew that it was going to be okay and that we were finally on the path to becoming parents, which we were. And even now, I'm tearing up. And so for me, like, there's no one way God manifests, but in these very different ways at different times, when I have called out, and I think I do need to be receptive to them. It's not like God just shows up in my normal everyday life when I'm, not thinking about it. I need to be in a place where I'm open and receptive and may I even say looking for it, that I am more likely to encounter an experience of God.
That's really beautiful. I'm so grateful that you shared that with me and with the people listening to this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of the people listening to this podcast, God willing, there are some.
I hope so too.
What's something that you're working on right now that you want the Jewcurious people to know about?
Oh, gosh, so many things. Well, I would say one thing that I'm working on right now that is very interesting is investigating different aspects of how the study and research that's going on in a field called positive psychology is interacting with Judaism and Jewish tradition. Positive psychology is the study of how we can flourish more in our lives, right? Regular psychology is how when there's something going wrong, you help to solve or ameliorate the problem. Positive psychology is, okay, when everything's basically fine, when you're kind of at your neutral point, how do you get better? How do you flourish? How do you particularly succeed and thrive and have a meaningful life? And there are lots of interesting studies coming out showing that things like having rituals, daily rituals or weekly rituals in your life help you to thrive. And wow, isn't that interesting? Because Judaism has a lot of rituals, right?
I was going to say, wait a minute, Judaism has rituals. I've heard.
There's things that show practice is really important. And gosh, guess what? This is true. And I think that for me, really looking at learning from this big field of science and exploration, are there ways that we can lift up certain rituals and traditions in Judaism that we should be either using differently or doing more to help us? And perhaps there's some things we shouldn't be doing at all because they're not so helpful. So for me, this has been a very interesting exploration. I feel like I'm still kind of at the beginning of it, but it's interesting, I think.
Is there something in particular that with this research you've sort of increased in your own practice? And or maybe something that you've kind of let go of in your own practice because of this,
yes.
Because of this exploration?
Yes and yes. So the thing that I have increased in my own practice is indeed gratitude practices. So there is a prayer called Modeh Ani, which in the morning is part of the morning prayer service, where when you get up, you thank God for returning your soul to you so that you can face a new day. And for me, sometimes waking up isn't so easy. That is not always what I want to do first thing in the morning. And I tend to be someone who's a little stressed and anxious. And so I have taken on the practice of sitting up on the side of my bed, and before I even leave the bed, I recite this 2-line prayer. And, it takes, 5-10 seconds. Like it's a very short, small ritual, but it has really helped me. I've been doing it for at least a year now. And that is really pretty much the sum total of my morning prayer practice. But it's in some ways, that's all I need, and it's everything I need. You know what I mean? Like it's just that 2-line prayer is like, okay, thank you, God. I'm here. I need to feel the gratitude that I'm able to wake up. I'm able to get out of my bed. I'm able to face this day that's going to come. And there's some days I say, please help me face this day I'm about to have. And that gets me out of bed and gets me going. So that's been very helpful. And oh boy, this one I kind of hesitate to share publicly, but I'm going to anyway. The thing that I've given up doing actually is, and hold on to your seats here, is fasting on Yom Kippur. I'm not a faster. I'm someone who does not fast well. I've never fasted well, and it makes me really physically ill. I get migraines when I fast, and I'm someone who I have to be very careful in how I eat, so I don't suffer from chronic pain. And fasting is just a clear tip. And so, but I've always felt, oh my God, I'm a rabbi. How can I not fast on Yom Kippur? Until I started studying positive psychology. And part of what I learned was, you should let go of the things in your life that are bad for you, that can cause you harm. And for years, my husband's been saying to me, this is ridiculous. You don't have to eat a feast, but eat a little something. Eat enough so you don't get pain. You're not to get migraine on Yom Kippur. That's not the point of fasting. And finally, the study of positive psychology, for whatever reason, allowed that switch to go off in my brain where I could make this decision and say, right, I don't need to go to the point of suffering. So I don't overeat on Yom Kippur. It's very simple. Like I prepare food ahead of time. I would have like a hard-boiled egg for breakfast. That's all I need, right? And like another hard-boiled egg and maybe a piece of like a filter fish or something for lunch. So again, bare minimum food, but it's enough so that I don't get a migraine. And it frankly makes all the difference, because then I am much more able to actually experience the holiday as it's supposed to be experienced and focus on, what is it that I can do better in the year to come, rather than spending half of the day moaning in bed and spending the next 2 days in bed because it takes that long.
Well, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that you've shared something that's personal and vulnerable. And as a rabbi, I can, it's hard when when there are topics like, okay, remember that thing that I taught you the right way to do and the one that everybody does? Right. Well, ignore the fact that first off, only something like 50% of the people do that. But I personally don't find that meaningful, even though that's the tradition, and that there are other ways to observe the spirit of that day. In the sense that, so we are not biblical Jews, we are rabbinic Jews. Like we follow the Talmud and the law codes and things like that. But in the Torah, all it says is this is a day of affliction. This is a day on which you will afflict yourselves. And from that, the rabbis deduced various restrictions, including fasting.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a way that a population of Jews adapted to afflicting themselves. We don't hit each other with chains, and we don't we don't wear hair shirts so much, or sackcloth and ashes, that kind of thing. But so afflict. What does afflict mean? Afflict means don't eat anything, right? But and it's even not about the affliction. It's about the atonement. It's about the frame of mind. It's about the humbling oneself. It's not about the food. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think that's a powerful teaching for people to hear, and especially powerful in that it is personal and brave of you to share that with us.
Thank you. All of this is personal. I mean, that's the other thing that I think is so important for people to hear is that, there's no one right way to do Jewish, right? It is a matter of what works best for you and where you find personal meaning. And that's why, the only way that I can share Judaism is by sharing my own personal stories and journey through it. Because what works for me may not work for somebody else. As far as I'm concerned, that's fine. We're still observing the same traditions in religion. We're just doing it slightly differently, but it's the same umbrella.
Right. I think that's awesome. And as I learned from our friend Rabbi Hirschfield, anytime somebody says, "If I were you, I would," what they really mean is, if you were me, you would.
Correct.
Do this thing.
Right.
And so, acknowledging that all advice is autobiography, right?
Yes.
And yet can still be provisionally useful.
Right.
I really appreciate this conversation, and both for my sake, I'm not surprised. I always learn a ton from you, and this time is no exception. And I hope that my listeners have gotten something out of it as well. I'm quite certain of it. What's the best way for people to connect with you if they have further questions about anything you've said, or want to learn more about positive psychology, or Rabbis Without Borders, or RabbiCareers.com? How should people reach you?
Great. Thank you for asking. I'm very findable online. My email is rsirbu, SIRBU, at clal.org. Or if you just Google Rabbi Rebecca Sirbu, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, anywhere. I'm out there. I'm around. Follow me, like me. I'm happy to engage in conversation with people. And I wish everybody the best of luck on their own journeys.
Well, I already like you. And nevertheless, I will share all of those links to your places in the show notes for this podcast. And I'm going to sign off right now. But first, I wanted to say thank you very much for spending this time with me, and for teaching me, and for teaching the Jew Curious.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It was an honor to be here and to have this conversation with you.
Hiro, thank you for spending your time today with me and Rabbi Sirbu. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share that powerful conversation with you. What I also want to share with you is, as usual, the show notes. You can find Rabbi Sirbu's bio, links to her work, all sorts of things that we talked about in this episode, in links that appear on the show notes page that you can get to through going to Jewcurious.show/episode 6. That's episode and the numeral 6. No spaces, no dashes, no nothing. And in addition to the show notes, to express my gratitude to you today, I've put there something that I made for you. It's a link to a checklist that I prepared that's called 5 Limiting Beliefs About Judaism and How to Overcome Them. If you're not getting the most out of your Jewish experience, or if you feel some barrier between you and beginning having a Jewish experience, you may be holding on to one of these 5 limiting beliefs. And so I want you to check that list out, see my suggestions for overcoming them. Let me know what you think. But because today is all about border crossing and boundary stretching and working through false assumptions and limiting beliefs, I wanted to make sure that you had access to this. And while you're there, after you've clicked the big golden download this button, you can actually keep scrolling down the page to an underused section of show notes, I'll say, and this is the comment section. So in the show notes of this page, I would love it if you'd scroll down all the way down to the box that asks for your comments and let me know, what did you think of this episode? What do you think of this podcast? How's it going for you? What questions has either this episode or any other episodes raised for you that are still unanswered, so that I can bring on future guests, ask them these questions. I could follow up with Rabbi Sirbu about these questions and give you what you need to really thrive and, as the rabbi says, flourish in your life and bring the tools of Judaism to help you do that. But in order for me to help you that way, I need to see your comments. I need to see what you think. I need to see what questions you have so that we can start from there and move farther down this journey of learning together. If you would do that, as we say in Texas, I'd be much obliged. Thanks again for sharing this time with me and this time with my guest. And until next time, Hiro, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Jewcurious Show at www.jewcurious.show.